I walked out of the orphanage with $40 and a garbage bag of clothes. 2 hours later, a lawyer handed me a deed to a sealed cave and a letter from the dead father I thought abandoned me. It read, "They are coming. Finish what I started." The heavy wooden doors of St. Jude's Home for Boys closed behind me with a hollow, absolute thud. It was a Tuesday in November, my 18th birthday, and the state of Oregon had officially washed its hands of me. For 14 years I had been Ward 402, a statistic in a broken foster system. I stood on the rain-slicked pavement, holding a black trash bag containing 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, and a pair of scuffed boots. Mrs. Gable, the director, who had looked at me with thinly veiled exhaustion for over a decade, hadn't even offered a goodbye. Just a bus token and a stern warning to keep my nose clean. I was supposed to go to a halfway house in Portland. That was the plan. But before I could even reach the bus stop, a sleek silver sedan pulled up to the curb, splashing muddy water onto my sneakers. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a gaunt man in a tailored charcoal suit. He looked entirely out of place in this rundown neighborhood. "Caleb Foster?" he asked. His voice was tight, anxious. "Who's asking?" I replied, my grip tightening on my plastic bag. In my world, men in suits only brought bad news. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he said, holding up a leather-bound folder. "I'm an attorney with Pendleton, Hayes and Associates. I represent the estate of David and Sarah Foster, your parents." The air in my lungs turned to ice. My parents. The people who had dumped me at a fire station when I was 4 years old and vanished off the face of the earth. I had spent my entire childhood hating them, crafting elaborate fantasies where I'd confront them and demand to know why I wasn't enough. "They're dead," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was the only logical explanation I had accepted years ago. "Yes," Pendleton said softly. "They passed away 14 years ago. But I have strict instructions from your father's will to execute his final estate transfer on your 18th birthday. Please get in. We have a lot to discuss, and it isn't safe out here." Not safe. The paranoia in his eyes was genuine, against every survival instinct saint. Jude's had beaten into me. I got in the car. Pendleton didn't take me to a fancy downtown office. He drove me to a sterile, windowless conference room in a strip mall near the airport. He placed a heavy brass-cornered lockbox on the table, along with a thick stack of manila folders. "Your parents didn't abandon you because they didn't love you." "Caleb." Pendleton began his hands, trembling slightly as he unlocked the box. "They left you behind to hide you. They were researchers, geologists working for a private defense contractor. They found something. Or rather, they built something to protect what they found." He slid a piece of heavy parchment across the table. It was a deed. "They left you nothing in the way of liquid assets, but they left you this: 40 acres of land in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, specifically a geographical anomaly known locally as the Hollows. It contains a sealed cave system." I stared at the paper. "A cave. I'm homeless, and you're giving me a hole in the ground." "It is not just a hole in the ground," Pendleton said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He handed me a sealed envelope. "This is from your father. I don't know what it says. I was paid a substantial sum to hold this box in a vault until today hand it to you and walk away forever. That is exactly what I am going to do. Do not contact me again, Caleb. For your own sake." Without another word, Pendleton stood up, left the room, and drove away, leaving me alone with the lockbox and the deed. I tore open the envelope. The handwriting was erratic, rushed. Caleb, if you are reading this, I am dead and you are finally of age. I am so sorry for the life you have had to live. We had to make them think you were just another unwanted child, so they wouldn't use you as leverage. The cave in North Carolina is sealed with a blast door. Inside is our life's work. It is the only thing that matters now. The combination is your mother's birthday. They are coming, Caleb. They never stopped looking for the vault. Finish what I started. Build the sanctuary. 2 days later, I used the last of my meager savings to take a Greyhound bus across the country to the small, dying coal town of Oak Haven, North Carolina. The property was located 5 miles up a treacherous, overgrown logging road. When I finally hiked up through the dense, damp pines, I found it. It wasn't a natural cave entrance. Carved directly into the side of a massive granite cliff was a colossal, rust-covered steel blast door. It looked like a relic from the Cold War, camouflaged by decades of creeping ivy and moss. There was a heavy electronic keypad beside the door, completely dead, and a manual override wheel secured by a rusted heavy-duty padlock. I was an 18-year-old orphan with no money, no family, and a deed to a bunker in the middle of nowhere. I sat in the dirt, staring at the imposing steel wall, and realized the cruelest joke of all I had inherited, a treasure I had absolutely no way of opening. But for the first time in my life, I owned something. I belonged to a legacy. And I swore to myself, sitting in the damp Carolina mud, that I would break into that mountain if I had to tear the steel apart with my bare hands. Survival became my primary obsession, second only to the door. I couldn't crack a blast door on an empty stomach, so I hiked back down to Oak Haven and lied my way into a job at Holloway Construction. I told the foreman, a gruff man named Thomas, that I was 21 and had experience running heavy machinery. I didn't, but I learned fast. I had to. I bought a beat-up, water-damaged camper trailer for $300 and towed it up the logging road, parking it in a small clearing a few hundred yards below the cave entrance. By day, I poured concrete-hauled lumber and secretly studied every blueprint-cutting torch and structural engineering manual I could get my hands on. By night, I became a grave robber, trying to exhume my own inheritance. It took me 3 months to realize I wasn't the only one interested in the hollows. It happened on a freezing Tuesday evening. I was walking out of the local hardware store with a bundle of heavy-gauge wiring and portable generator parts when a black SUV pulled up, blocking my path. A man stepped out. He wore a cashmere overcoat that cost more than my trailer, and his smile was as sharp as a razor. "Caleb Foster," he said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Harrison Croft, Croft Industries. I'm a local land developer." I didn't take his hand. "I don't have any money, Mr. Croft." "I know." Croft chuckled, pulling a silver cigarette case from his pocket. "But you have land. 40 acres of useless, unarable rock up in the hollows. It's an eyesore, frankly, but my company is looking to build a luxury eco-resort, and we need your acreage for the access roads. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 cash today. You can leave this depressing town and start a real life." $50,000 to a kid who grew up in St. Jude's eating powdered eggs. It was lottery money. But I remembered Pendleton's paranoia. I remembered my father's letter. They never stopped looking. "It's not for sale," I said, stepping around him. Croft's smile vanished. His eyes grew cold, dead. "You're a boy playing in a sandbox you don't understand, Caleb. Your father was a stubborn fool, too. Look where it got him. Sell the land, or I will take it from you, and I won't pay you a dime." He knew my father. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The people my father had warned me about Croft was one of them or working for them. "Get out of my way," I growled, shoving past him. That night, the warnings turned into action. I was up at the blast door, trying to rig the portable generator to the dead electronic keypad when I smelled smoke. I sprinted down the trail toward my clearing. My camper trailer was engulfed in a roaring inferno. The flames licked the pine canopy, casting demonic shadows across the woods. Everything I owned, my clothes, my meager savings, my food was burning to ash. I stood in the freezing rain, watching my life burn for the second time. They wanted to starve me out. They wanted me broken. Instead, it ignited a rage inside me so profound it cleared my mind entirely. Croft wanted the cave because he couldn't get into it himself without drawing federal attention. He needed the deed. He needed me gone. The next night, I didn't bother with the electronic keypad. I went back to the construction site after hours and stole an industrial gas-powered exothermic cutting torch. If they were going to play dirty, so was I. I hauled the massive tanks up the mountain under the cover of darkness. I fired up the torch, the brilliant blue-white flame blinding in the pitch black. I targeted the manual override wheel, specifically the massive deadbolts securing it. It took 6 hours of agonizing, back-breaking labor. The heat blistered my hands, and the toxic smoke burned my lungs. But slowly the rusted steel began to give way, melting into glowing rivers of slag. At 4 a.m., with a sickening crack, the primary locking mechanism snapped. I dropped the torch, grabbed a heavy iron crowbar, and jammed it into the wheel. I threw my entire body weight against it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, echoing groan that sounded like the mountain itself was screaming, the wheel turned. A hiss of stale, pressurized air blasted out from the seam of the door, smelling of ozone and dry earth. I hooked a winch from a rented truck to the door handle and pulled. The massive steel slab slowly swung outward. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight and stepped into the inheritance of David and Sarah Foster. I expected gold. I expected weapons. I expected dusty boxes of classified documents. I found none of that. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a cavernous space that defied belief. The cave had been excavated and reinforced with pristine white carbon fiber paneling. It was a subterranean compound. But what took my breath away were the rows upon rows of massive glass cylindrical tanks lining the walls, glowing with a faint, dormant bioluminescence. Inside the tanks weren't weapons. They were plants, rare, impossible botanical specimens suspended in some kind of stasis gel. Beyond the tanks stood banks of massive archaic servers, dead and silent, thick cables running into a geothermal vent in the floor. I found a metal desk in the center of the room. On it lay a heavy, leather-bound ledger and a framed photograph of a man and a woman holding a baby. My parents and me. I opened the ledger. The first page contained a single paragraph. Project Eden. The world's topsoil is dying. The aquifers are tainted with microtoxins that Croft Industries engineered. We have built the sanctuary. We have the untainted seed lines and the pure water synthesis algorithms. If Harrison Croft gets this, he will hold a monopoly on the global food supply within 20 years. To whoever finds this, boot the system. Find Dr. Evelyn Reed at the Raleigh Institute of Agriculture. She is the only one who can decrypt the final sequence. I walked over to the main server bank. Beside it was a large, heavy mechanical lever labeled Geothermal Primary. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the lever and pulled it down. Deep beneath my feet, a turbine whined to life. The vibration traveled up through the soles of my boots. Slowly, systematically, the compound began to power up. The glass tanks illuminated, bathing the cavern in an eerie, beautiful green light. Then the main computer monitor on the desk flickered on. A terminal window appeared with a blinking cursor. Text began to scroll across the screen at lightning speed. System online. Biosphere. Stability 88% warning. Unauthorized access detected on perimeter sensors. I spun around, looking back toward the open blast door. Down in the valley through the trees, I could see the headlights of 3 black SUVs creeping up my logging road. Croft hadn't just burned my trailer. He had left spotters. The screen blinked red. Initiating lockdown in 60 seconds. I had 1 minute to decide whether to run back into the night and lose my legacy forever, or stay inside the mountain and trap myself with whatever secrets my parents had buried. I slammed my fist onto the heavy red button on the desk, labeled Seal. The massive steel blast door began to groan, swinging shut to seal me inside the mountain, just as the headlights breached the clearing. The grinding screech of the steel blast door echoing through the cavern was the loudest sound I had ever heard. 3 massive hydraulic deadbolts slammed into place, shaking the granite walls and sending a shower of ancient dust down upon the carbon fiber floor. I stood in the center of the subterranean greenhouse, bathed in the eerie bioluminescent green glow of the stasis tanks. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the thick rock, the muffled, angry shouts of Harrison Croft's men were barely audible, followed by the dull thud of heavy fists striking the immovable steel. I was safe, but I was buried alive. I walked back to the metal desk and slumped into the rolling chair. The main computer monitor glared at me, the red warning text blinking rhythmically. I tapped the keyboard, searching for an override or a camera feed. A window snapped open, displaying grainy black and white night vision footage from a hidden camera outside the entrance. There were 4 men. They were heavily armed, wearing tactical gear, devoid of any identifying insignia. Croft stood behind them, in his expensive cashmere coat, his face contorted in rage. He stepped up to the blast door and pressed his mouth near a rusted external speaker. Inside the cavern, the intercom crackled to life. His voice was distorted, but dripping with malice. "Caleb, you arrogant, stupid boy. You think locking yourself in a tomb makes you a winner. There is no secondary exit. You have no food, no water, and no leverage. Open the door now, and I will let you walk down that mountain alive. Keep it shut, and you can starve in the dark with your parents' ghosts." I stared at the camera feed, then reached out and slammed the intercom's power button, cutting him off mid-sentence. I needed to know if he was right. I grabbed my flashlight and began a systematic search of my new prison. The compound was larger than I had initially realized, stretching deep into the natural fissures of the mountain. Behind the main server bank, I found a heavy airtight door leading to the life support sector. My parents had planned for a siege. Lined against the walls were military-grade shelving units, stacked high with hundreds of crates of dehydrated rations, MRIs, and medical supplies. Next to them hummed an atmospheric water generator, steadily pulling moisture from the subterranean air and purifying it into a massive stainless steel holding tank. I wasn't going to starve. I wasn't going to die of thirst. I had time. I returned to the terminal. The ledger had instructed me to find Dr. Evelyn Reed at the Raleigh Institute of Agriculture. I navigated the archaic custom-built operating system until I found a heavily encrypted communications array. It was primitive by today's standards, a narrow-band shortwave radio transmitter patched through a secure proxy, but it was functional. I typed in the frequency and contact protocols listed in the ledger. For 10 agonizing minutes, the screen simply read, "Attempting connection." Then a line of text appeared. "Who is this? This frequency is dead." I typed furiously. "My name is Caleb Foster. I am David and Sarah Foster's son. I am inside the hollows." The cursor blinked steadily for almost a full minute. I thought I had lost the connection. Finally, the response came. "Caleb. Oh my God. They said you died with them. You shouldn't have gone there. Is the vault secure?" "For now," I replied. "Harrison Croft is outside with armed men." "What is in these tanks?" "Dr. Reed. Why did they kill my parents for it?" The screen went blank, and then a secure voiceover. IP channel opened. The audio was scratchy, filled with static, but the woman's voice on the other end was clear, trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "Caleb, listen to me very carefully," Dr. Reed said. "Your parents didn't just build a seed bank. They built an ark." 10 years ago, Croft Industries quietly released a proprietary agricultural pesticide called Aegis 7. It was supposed to maximize crop yields. What it actually did was slowly strip the topsoil of natural microbes. It engineered a dependency. Within 5 years, no commercial crop on Earth will be able to grow without Croft's patented synthetic chemical fertilizers. The magnitude of what she was saying sent a chill down my spine. "He's engineering a global famine to hold a monopoly on food." "Yes," she whispered. "Your parents discovered the flaw in Aegis 7 before it was released. When they tried to blow the whistle, Croft had their car run off a cliff. But before they died, they developed the cure. The plants in those tanks are genetically modified apex flora. Their root systems secrete an enzyme that neutralizes the Aegis 7 toxins and restores the soil in months, not decades. If Croft destroys that lab, he destroys the only antidote to his poison." A sudden violent vibration rattled the coffee mug on the desk. Dust rained down from the ceiling. I looked at the camera feed. Croft's men had unloaded a massive industrial diamond-tipped core drill from their trucks. They were anchoring it to the granite beside the blast door. "Dr. Reed," I said, my voice tightening. "They're drilling. They're going to bypass the door lock." "I need the genetic sequence Caleb," she pleaded. "The servers down there contain the raw data. If you transmit it to my mainframe at the Institute, I can take it straight to the Department of Justice and the EPA. We can prove Croft's fraud, but I need the data before they breach." I looked at the terminal. Transmit protocol offline. "I can't," I said. "The mountain's rock is too dense. The external antenna must have been destroyed." "There is a secondary telemetry wire," Dr. Reed said quickly. "Your father built a failsafe. It runs up the geothermal exhaust shaft. You have to manually splice it into the transmitter array to boost the signal. But Caleb, the exhaust shaft is active. It will be incredibly hot." I looked toward the back of the cavern where the heavy insulated metal grate of the exhaust shaft shuddered with the heat of the turbine. "How much time do I have?" I asked. "If they have a diamond core drill," she replied grimly. "Maybe 2 hours." The air inside the geothermal exhaust shaft was suffocating. The temperature hovered around 130 degrees, and the air smelled of sulfur and scorching metal. I wore a heavy leather welding jacket and thick gloves I had found in the supply closet, but the heat still seared my skin. I wedged my back against the narrow vertical rock wall, inching my way upward. In my teeth, I held a high-beam flashlight. Slung over my shoulder was a coil of heavy-gauge copper wiring. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. "Just a little further," I muttered to myself, the sweat stinging my eyes. The orphanage had taught me how to endure pain, how to detach my mind from my body when things got unbearable. I used every ounce of that traumatic resilience now. 30 feet up the shaft I found it. A thick, rubber-coated bundle of wires pinned to the rock face, leading toward the surface. My hands shook as I pulled a pair of wire strippers from my pocket. I sliced into the thickest cable, exposing the silver fiber optics beneath. I frantically spliced my copper coil into the array, wrapping it tightly with electrical tape. By the time I rappelled back down to the cavern floor, I was completely drenched in sweat, gasping for air. I stumbled to the main terminal and collapsed into the chair. The vibration from the drilling was constant now. The cavern echoed with a deafening high-pitched whine. On the monitor, the camera feed showed the drill bit, chewing deep into the granite right next to the door frame. They were packing the boreholes with C4 plastic explosives. They were going to blow the frame right out of the mountain. I hit the transmit button on the console, rerouting signal, establishing secure handshake, connection successful. "Evelyn," I yelled into the microphone over the noise of the drill. "It's connected." "I see it," she yelled back. "Data transfer is initiating. Caleb, it's a massive file size. It's going to take at least 10 minutes to upload." 10 minutes. I watched the camera feed. Croft was stepping back, signaling his men to take cover behind their armored SUVs. One of the mercenaries held a remote detonator. "They're going to blow the door," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Evelyn, if I don't make it, make sure Croft rots in a cell." "Caleb, get away from the entrance. Hide in the life support sector." I didn't run. If they breached the door, they would flood the cavern with incendiary grenades and burn the tanks before I could even stop them. I needed a deterrent. I grabbed my father's heavy iron crowbar from earlier and sprinted toward the glass stasis tanks. I studied the control panel attached to the central reservoir that pumped the preservation gel into the system. The gel was highly pressurized. I grabbed a massive wrench, locked it onto the primary release valve of the central tank, and positioned myself behind a thick concrete pillar. Boom! The explosion rocked the mountain. The shockwave threw me off my feet, slamming my shoulder hard into the concrete. The cavern filled with thick, blinding grey smoke and the sound of falling rock. The 3 hydraulic deadbolts hadn't broken, but the granite holding them had. The massive steel blast door sagged outward, screeching against its hinges. A gap wide enough for a man to slip through appeared. "Go, go, secure the servers, burn the tanks." Croft's voice echoed through the smoke. 2 heavily armed mercenaries slipped through the gap, their assault rifles raised laser sights, cutting through the dust. I didn't hesitate. I swung the crowbar with all my might, smashing the glass housing of the main pressure valve, and yanked the heavy wrench down. A deafening hiss erupted through the room. Thousands of gallons of the dense, freezing stasis gel blew out of the emergency vents in a massive, blinding white cloud. The sudden drop in temperature and the sheer force of the pressurized vapor hit the mercenaries like a physical wall. They screamed, firing blindly into the fog, their weapons jamming as the gel rapidly crystallized in the mechanisms. I stayed low, crawling back to the terminal. Upload status: 98%, 99%, 100%. Transfer complete. "I have it." Dr. Evelyn Reed's voice rang through the speaker, triumphant. "Caleb, I'm forwarding it to the FBI Cyber Crimes Division and the Department of Agriculture. Right now. Help is on the way." Through the dissipating fog, I saw Croft himself squeeze through the broken door frame. He held a sleek, suppressed pistol, his eyes sweeping the ruined cavern. He saw the glowing servers. He saw me. "You little rat," he snarled, raising the weapon. Before he could pull the trigger, the mountain was bathed in a blinding, strobing blue light. The rhythmic thumping of heavy rotor blades drowned out the whine of the geothermal turbine. Through the gap in the door, I saw Croft's expression, drop from fury to absolute paralyzing terror. "FBI, drop your weapons, get on the ground," a megaphone voice boomed from the valley outside. Dozens of federal agents, tipped off by Evelyn's massive data dump of Croft's corporate treason, swarmed the clearing. Croft hesitated, looking at me then at the servers. He lowered his gun, raising his hands in defeat, as federal agents poured through the breach, tackling him to the floor. I sat back in my father's chair, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, replaced by a profound, overwhelming exhaustion. 2 days later, I walked out of the Hollows for the last time. I wasn't carrying a garbage bag of clothes. I carried my parents' ledger. Harrison Croft was facing life in federal prison for domestic terrorism and corporate sabotage. Dr. Evelyn Reed had taken custody of the apex flora, beginning the long process of healing the world's dying soil. And me, the government offered me $50 million for the exclusive rights to the sanctuary's technology. I walked out of the orphanage with $40, and I walked out of that mountain as the guardian of my family's legacy. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize my parents had left me the seeds. If this story of surviving the impossible and claiming a hidden legacy kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a massive plot twist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible heart-pounding stories of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary life-changing situations. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you inherited a secret bunker